justice, temperance, wisdom, courage. Applying ancient philosophy to modern times, this is the Sunday Stoic.
This is the Sunday Stoic. I'm a bit under the weather again. Daycare and children do that to you, at least to me. But I wanted to talk on this episode about the sage, the Stoic ideal that we've mentioned so many times before. This wise man or wise person, the Stoic ideal of perfection. What would this individual be like? I'm going to explore Seneca's view of the sage today, and I'm going to read some quotes and paraphrases from various pieces of his work, and the references will be cited in the show notes. So what is the sage? The sage is rare, showing up perhaps once every 500 years. They, like everyone else, will experience impressions and emotions when things outside their power occur, but they can quickly apply reason to the situation and act appropriately. It will no longer affect them. The sage relies on herself for happiness, a happiness that comes from within, not from externals. She carries her goods with her. The sage is content with virtue alone, but is happy to have possessions and friends. The sage enjoys friendship for the sake of serving his friends, not as a means to gain anything. A sage is different. He is kind to friends, restrained toward enemies. His political and personal business is carried out with scrupulous devotion, willing to suffer long where endurance is needed, and not lacking in prudence where action is taken. Besides, he is always the same, consistent in all actions, sound in judgment, and trained by habit, that he not only can act rightly, but can't help but act rightly. The sage accepts the loss of friends and family with the same spirit that he awaits his own loss. The underlying principle of virtue is conformity. The sage is wise, but not all-knowing. He will therefore spend time with other wise people who may share knowledge with him. The sage acts rightly in all situations, without second-guessing himself. The sage regards the reasons for his actions, not the results. The sage is not thrust out of life by death, but is ready and goes willingly. He will live as long as he ought, not as long as he can. The sage is ready from attacks on all fronts. He is fortified against attack of poverty, sorrow, disgrace, or pain. The sage is not over-enamored with the gifts of fortune. He will lay them aside, while the rest of us snatch up these gifts like dogs catching a piece of meat. The sage does not drink to excess, nor does he covet possessions. Being a sage doesn't mean you are all-knowing. That's the role of a god. A sage is all-wise, meaning they know how to act in all kinds of circumstances. They will act according to their principles. They have learned Stoic principles deeply and will always fall back on them. That doesn't mean they always have the outcome they may have hoped would happen, if you will, but they know that they have a reserve clause in place at all times. The sage will say, well, I acted according to principles. That doesn't mean the final outcome will be what I had hoped for. So once again, the sage is not all wise. I think of Sherlock Holmes when I say that, because there's an episode, it's in the original book is where I first heard it, but I think it appears in the new BBC series as well, where Sherlock Holmes knows all this stuff about evidence, finding evidence and figuring out what it means, but he has no idea that the earth revolves around the sun, because to him that's trivial knowledge. It doesn't change his day-to-day life. And the Stoics warn us that to be wise means other people may think you a fool. You won't know about the big game this weekend. You won't know about things that they think are important, but you will know how to avoid being upset by things outside your power. You will know what kind of decisions you should make as a Stoic. A sage has friends, and a sage loves their friends, but they also realize that they can be good, moral people, even if they don't have friends or possessions. A sage would own useful possessions, but they wouldn't be owned by their possessions.
A sage would act the same way in front of their friends or their enemies, in front of their loved ones or in front of the president. They are the same person in all circumstances. They don't change who they are to fit the circumstances. They are grounded in principle. So basically, to sum it up in one sentence, a sage would be caring, content, calm, and practical. So that's what we need to work on. What can you do to be caring, content, calm, and practical? We need to care for others. That's justice. We need to be content and accept things we cannot change and be happy with our possessions. That involves being temperate and understanding wisdom. We need to be calm and not overreact to things, and practical with our practical wisdom. So what can we do to meet these things? Start by reading the Stoics and start by engaging in those daily practices. That's all I have this week. Today's my birthday, and I'm sick, so I'm checking out. You all have a great week. Carpe diem.